Let's do a crash course on Flexbox containers inside of Elementor because some of you are a little bit unsure, nervous, or you're still not used to it. We're going to cover off the basics of what you need to know so you have a better understanding of it. We're going to hit the plus sign and we have the option for Flexbox or grid. We're just going to focus on Flexbox containers. You click that and you get a range of options. The arrow pointing down and the arrow pointing to the right does confuse people. What this means is you're going to have a single container. And if the arrow is going down, as you add in your items, they're all going to stack above one another. And if you go for the horizontal or the row direction, as you add in items, they will sit side by side. I'm going to show you that, so don't worry. And then we have some other variations where you could have a parent container and two child containers inside. This has also got two child containers, but the first child container is smaller than the second. Here we have four, and you can see the different layouts. Don't worry, I'm going to cover off child containers as well, but let's start really simple. A lot of you, traditionally when you were using section and columns, would have been using the direction column section. And in this case, we're going to do a container. Let's go and click it, and that's what we have over here. This is now what you're probably very much used to. So if I start to add in content, we'll go for a heading and we'll go for a text editor and we'll go for an image as well. This is what you're going to be used to. As you were working with section and columns, you just dropped items in and they kind of just stacked above one another. Let's now explore that. When you click on the 6 dots, so that now we can go to the settings for the container, go to the layout, and you will see over here that we are using the Flexbox. That's what we're doing for the purpose of this video and tutorial. Now, let's just go over things you should be used to. Boxed width. Well, at the moment, it's 140. If you went for full width, you can see it's now gone all the way to the edge of the screen, which is what it will do even when you're viewing it on a live. The height, well, again, you should be used to that. So if we start to increase the height of the container increases. And obviously, you can use BH as well. Let's set it to be 500 just so we get a little bit of spacing down here. Again, the other setting you should be used to is the margin and the padding. So if I set that to 50, we will now have 50 pixels inside of that container. So that if I do go back to the width and I set it to be full width, it's not completely against the edge because now we have a 50 pixel gap. Let's put it back onto boxed. Now let's have a look at these settings here because this is the new thing about Flexbox containers that if you're not using it, you may be a little bit confused, but it's really easy to understand. Look at the direction of the items as I added them. They went below one another, and that's what we have over here. Everything is stacking from top to bottom. Notice over here we have column reversed. I clicked that and it's gone the other way around, right? Can you see that? But it now starts from the bottom. And if we put it back to how it was before, and this time now go for the row horizontal, what will happen is everything stacks side by side. So when you have column, it stacks top to bottom or bottom to top. Row direction left to right goes left to right. But if I was to go with the reverse item, it now goes right to left. So you're reversing the items. If you were to go over to your navigator over here, you will see that in my container, we still have heading, text, and image. So the order you add them in does not change. All that's changed is how we are presenting it. So I'm going to go back to column and we are going to be looking at the direction row because there's so many more features available for you. Over here at the moment, everything starts at the top because we have this extra bit of space at the bottom. And that's because it always defaults to be at the start. And over here you have justify content. If I click start, nothing is going to change. But watch the items. If I go center, it's moved to the center. If I go end, it's moved all the way down. Let me put it back to the start. Center, end. So very quickly, we're realigning items just by one quick setting. What about space between? Look at the items on the screen. They are now spaced between. What about space around? And what about space evenly? The more items you add, what you get with space around and space evenly can look a little bit different. However, it's so easy for you to change your opinion over what you want to show by using these settings. Now, I want to put it back onto the start over there. Okay, remember we got 50 pixel here, we've got 50 pixel at the bottom, and we have this load more empty space. We also have the setting for align items. Again, everything defaults to the start. So you click start, nothing changes. What about if you do center? It should be obvious it's gone to the center. What if you go for end? Well, it goes all the way to the end. And if you go for stretch, well, that's a little bit like the start, and it depends on what items you have on the screen. But for simplicity, if you were to now go with center, everything is centered now horizontally and vertically. or you might go with end center or end right. So there's so much versatility in what you can do. I mean, you're literally controlling where those items sit along the horizontal and vertical planes. But it gets a whole lot more interesting when you want to maneuver individual items. So let's say we've decided on our container, we're going to be starting at the start, the top, and on the left, and everything is in a direction. But I want this image to be on the far right-hand side. Okay, I don't want it to be there. I want it to be on the right-hand side. So if I go over here and I now click that, well, the text goes as well. So let's pop it back, but I want the image on the far right. You click on the image, you go to the Advanced tab, and over here you will have Align Cell. Watch what happens when I click Center. And now when I go for End, can you see where the image has gone? We've maneuvered it, but you've maintained your heading and your text on the left-hand side. Well, that's really, really good. But what if I now want the image to be at the bottom down here, but I still want my text and my heading to stay at the top? I'm now going to go to the item above the image. I want the image to go right to the bottom, bearing in mind we have 50 pixel padding inside of this container. If I go to the text and I click the Advanced tab, we have a setting over here called Grow. You click Grow and it's grown. The text has not increased in size, it's still as it is, but look at that image. That image is now at the bottom. So we've gone and maneuvered certain items a little bit. Another thing to take into account when you are working with columns is what is the gap between each of the items. And over here we have gaps defaulting at the moment to 20 in the column and 20 in the row. I'm going to zero these all out. And you can now see we have no gap. If I was to go in and type in 50, you'd have 50 pixels between each item you add in. Let me go back over and pop this back to be 20 just so that you can see the values. Now let's have a look at the row, because this is where it gets really interesting. I am going to just hit that and you can see what it's done. You may go, well, that's fine. That's exactly what I want. I have now achieved what you normally would have done with an extra 2 columns. You know, in the old days, you had your section, you had a column and another column. Or you went and set them all to be inline, and it sometimes got a little bit messy. You're now doing this with the same container and you've gone from column to row. But what if you want the header and the text to be on their own line and you still want the image to be below, but you've now got, say, 4 images in total? Before I show you how to move those images onto their own line and how we can tidy this up, let's just now go through some of the settings just so you understand the row. The idea is when you were a column, okay, every time you add in a new item, they stack above one another. But when you do it as a row, every time you add in an item, they're just going to go into the same line, and it can get really messy. Let's add in a button. Let's add in Google Maps. Look, it starts to get really convolutedly busy. So let's focus on the settings first. We're on a row, okay? At the moment, all of your content is left aligned. If I was to center it, all of your items would move to the center. I've got a duplicate container with 2 headings, and everything will normally default to be at the start. When you hit center, it moves to the center. Now, what you have to remember is that if this was a column and everything normally defaults at the start, when you hit center, it was on the vertical plane, and the align items were the horizontal plane. When you're working in rows, it's the other way around. So let me just undo all of these values, put it back to row. You hit center, it's now the horizontal. And when you go to align, that is now the vertical. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it really isn't that difficult, because if you do it and go, oh, that's not the right one, well, just click it again and you're undone it. Anyway, back over here, center, go to the end, space between, space around, and space evenly. Over here, everything defaults to the start. Center moves it to the middle. You go to the end. Really, really simple and easy to do. So I just wanted to show you what the settings are over here. And as I've already specified, you do have values here. So if I was to change this to be 100, you can see the gap now between your items. Now, why was that not working over here when I started to hit the settings? So if I go and hit this, nothing really changes. It's because I've got so many items in here and it's filling up the available 1140 estate. So when you have less items, you can see the maneuverment. But when you're doing it here and it's already full, it doesn't matter if you hit start, middle or end, it's not going anywhere. Now let's go and tidy this up. When you are working with row, you have the facility to wrap. Now, if I pop this into column, it is still there, but if you click it, it's not really going to do anything for you, okay? It doesn't really have any major benefit. So I'm going to undo that and pop it back as a row. So we are back to where we were. Now watch what happens to the items when I hit row. The heading and the text are now on their own line and the images have all wrapped over. I mean, there is a bit of luck involved over here because this text is so long, it's automatically gone onto the other line. But I'm now just going to do something a little bit funny. I'm going to go and shorten my text. And even though it's wrapped, the text and the heading are still on the first line, as is the first image. And the second, third, and fourth have gone to the next line. So you might look at it and go, well, this isn't really now working very well. Stay with me on this, okay? We do have some other additional items down here called center, start, end, space between, around, and even. I'm going to come back onto this, okay? This only enables or becomes visible after you hit row, so bear that in mind, and I will come back to that. Let's sort this out, because what if your content wasn't long and it still doesn't look right? I'm going to go over to my heading text, and I'm going to go to the Advanced tab, and over here we have width. What you want to do is now set your width. I'm going to set it to be full width. And by doing that, I'm now saying that entire line is just the heading. So watch that. You do that, there is nothing else now allowed here. Okay, I go to the text. We'll do the same thing. Advanced tab, go to the width and set it to be a full width. It is now on its own line. But what if I wanted the heading and the text to be on the same line? Well, let me now go to the heading. I've gone and hit custom. And can you now see how big it is? It's now shrunken down to be the size of the heading. What if we were to now go to the text? I could again do the custom, but again, the image has now come back up. What is this all about? When you're wrapping, the width of your elements or items will decide on whether you have the space to add further items. Imagine your horizontal plane is 100%. If I go and set this to be, say, 50% and this to be 50%, and I'm going to explain why that isn't completely true, they will sit on the same line. And if this is now 10%, well, now we're over 100%, right? 50, 50, 10. The 10% item automatically shifts to the second line. But there is a little bit of a caveat with regards to that. Let me show you. I'm going to go over to this item here and I'm going to set this to be 50. I'm going to go to my text and I'm going to set it to be 50. And technically, that should all fit on the same line. But it's gone to the second. Why? Because if we go to the parent container, we are adding in a gap of 20 column. So even though we got 50-50, the 20 column gap pushes everything over. If I go back to my parent container and I set the column gap to be 0, now we get the 50-50, but now we're missing the gap here. And sometimes what you have to do, and you know, some people don't always like doing this, is I would say leave in your gap. Go to my first item, set that to be 48%, and I might do the same over there as well. So both items are now on the same line. For simplicity, I'm just going to pop them both to be 100%. So you could have 3 items, and if they're all set to be 33.3 or 30% or 33%, they will all sit in a line. So working with percentages is pretty simple and easy to do. But if we look over here, our images at the moment are all wrapping onto the next line. Why? Because if you go to our parent container, our size is 1140. And each of these is set to be a width of 300 pixels in size. Now, one of the ways to get around this is that you could go in and start messing around with the width, but this can get a little bit unpredictable depending on what kind of images you have. The other thing you could also do is go to your Advanced tab and again start to mess around with the custom widths. You might go, well, let's go and set them to be 24%. Because we know that 25 and 25 is going to be 100%, but we've got the column gap, so it takes us over the 100%. And you might go with 23%, 23.5%, and you're continuously tinkering with it. There is something you can do that is so much easier. The first tip is to, for every image, change it to be 100% for your width and your max width. So I'm just going to set that to be 100 and 100 like that. Yeah, I know it's looking really super big at the moment. Then go to the Advanced tab, and for simplicity, I'm just going to go and set it for 20%. 20% is far less than it needs to be, but just look at the size of that image. Okay, it's shrunk down quite a bit. And then over here where we have the size, I'm going to set this to be grow. So what will happen is, with all of the items in here, this is now filling up 100% because there's 3 items in there at the moment. I want it to be 4. This one has grown to become bigger. Even though I set it to be 20%, it's grown. It's gone beyond the 20% to fill up the remaining gap. I'm now going to copy this. And remember, what we did is we set the style to be 100%. I've set the custom width to be 20%, and I've gone and hit the grow function over here. So I'm now going to copy that, and I'm going to paste the style. paste the style, and paste the style. That is now filling up 100%. It still has the column gap in there of 20. Look, I can prove it to you. I'm going to go over, and I'm now going to increase this to be 50. Look at that. It's still filling up the same estate. Lining those images was a more advanced stage, but I just wanted to show it to you in case you are going to add in a lot of items in your row and it starts to look a bit funny. But if you start to get used to just using the features here, Flexbox containers is really powerful for you, but we're not completely done yet. Notice how all of my items have this gap sitting in between them. If I go over to the container and I go and hit start, it should be right at the top, right? Look, you do that and it moves down a bit. You do end and it comes down, but everything is right at the top. And that's because the moment you hit wrap, you have default align content activate. I know so many people, they're using the row feature and they've got wrap and they're literally going, well, how do I get that to be higher up? I don't want it to be there. And they're messing around with margins and other features. All you've got to do is go here and go and click start. And now everything moves up. You go and hit end, it moves down. You go and hit center, it's kind of now in the center. Notice that looked like it was centered. That wasn't center. It was just adding in lots of gaps. That is your center. So you can wrap items and have them centrally positioned within your container, because you start to do all of this and maybe it's not doing what you think because of the amount of items you've got visible. And of course, you got space between space evenly as well. Now let me just cover off child containers because it works in the same way as what we've been doing with the elements. So here I have a parent container and I've made it a dark color. I'm going to insert into here a child container that you can clearly see. Let's go and make it be a different color like that. And then I'm going to go and insert another one. I'm just going to duplicate it and we'll give that another color as well. So if we go to the parent container, you can see here that it is currently set to be a row, which is why they're side by side. If it was in the column direction, you can see what it's doing. They're stacking. You could reverse it and you can see what happens. That's the row, and you can flip it the other way around as well. And the same thing applies with everything we've done here. If you're in the column, you could go center, go to the bottom, space between, space evenly. Because they're going all the way across, what you see here in terms of center, start, and end isn't going to make much of a difference unless they were a smaller width. You need to set the width to be a full width. A lot of people struggle with this because you go, I only want it to be 400 in width. You got to set it to full width first. And then you can go over here and start to mess around with either the width in pixels, or you could go to percentage and you might say, make that be 40%. Let's go to the second one. Again, make it full width. And we're now going to set this to be 60%. If I now go to the align items, you can see what they're doing. Now I'm going to pop these to be side by side. So I'm going to change it to be a row and you can see what it's done. We now have 40% and 60%, but it takes into account that we do have a gap. So if I was to get rid of the gap, it is still 40 and 60% just without any gap in between. Let's pop those values back in. Staying on the row, we can start to maneuver where those containers sit. I could, if I want, go to container number 1, start dropping in some items if I wanted, but go to the advanced tab and over here where we have stretch, look at that. We've got container, child container number 2, and child container number 1 is big. You will get used to doing this because some people focus on all of this and they start to mess around with the height of it to make it bigger. And they're kind of going, oh, is that right or wrong? Have I gone too far beyond? I mean, mathematically, you can work it out. But you could, if you want, just go to your advanced tab, click that, and that has now increased the size. And it won't get any bigger unless you go and add in loads of content. So I start duplicating this. Eventually, you will get to a point where it starts to push down, and it is based on how much content you add. If I go to my child container number 2 and I make this be 30% and I now duplicate that, I will now have another one side by side. I could, if I want, change this to be 15% and we can duplicate that. And you can see what it's doing. It's basically following the rules of doing the row setting. However, if I was to now go and set this to be, say, 25%, it starts to impact everything else. So I've said 40, 30, we've got 15, and now we've got 25. It's now starting to change that. So that's no longer now a real 15. However, if we go back over to the parent container, remember we have the wrap. You go and click wrap. 40, what was that? That was 30. This one is 15, and the 25 is now wrapped onto the next row, because we have now exceeded the 100%. So whereas with your elements, you would have been doing your custom width or 100% over here, Here you just go and change your layouts, make sure it's on a full width, and then go and add in your percentage, or you could do it with pixels, EM, REM, VW, or even stick in a clamp calculation as well. I can't stress enough how easy it is to get used to Flexbox containers once you start to mess around with it. You got nothing to lose. I've just been messing around with it on the fly. Go and create something you're very much used to, like, you know, a container or a hero banner with an image, a heading, or anything like that. And then start to play around with some of these features, because the more you get used to it, the more you're going to realize just how powerful they are for customized designs that go beyond what you've been doing before. Hey, I'm Imran from Web Squadron. I hope you like, subscribe, share, and follow. I hope you enjoyed this quick crash course. I'll see you soon.